gig with War Hamster Brady and Ghost of Base Patrick Henry. I want to start by telling you guys that we had last weekend on Saturday a Badlands fan club meetup in my hometown. And one of the audience members said that they wished that we would do live research and talk about the sources that we use, how we go about research, so that they themselves could have tools to do this on their own, to check our work. And I told the gentleman that mentioned this that we had done that in the past, but we don't do it often enough. And it just so happens that Brady said, "Hey, I think we should do this," not knowing anything about the meeting that I was at with General Quast and Dwayne Cates this past Saturday. And so immediately we jumped on this and said, absolutely. And so this is going to illustrate how we do this. And we're going to do it collectively so we can share the tools that we use. And as we go through this, we are going to talk about, like, for example, Ghost is the master of maps, and he can illustrate to you guys live time how he goes about finding those, what tools he uses. Brady's going to do the same thing, so will I. And so here you go.
Excellent introduction. Good to see you both again. Long time no see. Yeah, and I got a lot of really positive feedback on our Friday show. And what I heard over and over again is the three of you guys are a great combination. We need more. And so I've done a lot of shows with the Colonel, and obviously I've done a few with Ghost, but the three of us together, I think, is just the best of all worlds. So, and it's a lot of fun. So,
yeah, happy to be here. Yeah.
Go ahead. So all of us have a lot of people in our circle, fellow researchers that share stuff with us. We don't do this. Is not a solo project. It never has been. A mutual friend of Gordon's and mine, our friend Ethan, sent me a couple blurbs over the weekend, and I thought that this would be an awesome research, live research opportunity. So with no further ado.
Ethan, I haven't talked to Ethan in a while. Eager to see what he came up with.
He's pretty darn good. He's probably one of my best research friends. I wish I could keep up with everything he sends me.
For sure.
Okay. This is from X. 15-second blurb. Make sure I got volume.
Sir, it's a big honor and privilege to host you, and welcome to Odessa and welcome to Black Security Club. Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope the travel was okay. And we prepared weather for you. We built a theater.
Okay, do you recognize who the gentleman was? That would be none other than Mike Pompeo, Trump's former Secretary of State and head of the CIA, which is basically the same freaking job.
Yes.
So when I get started, when I start doing stuff like that, the first thing I want to do is, find out more about the person, see what kind of ties they have. We've known about Mike Pompeo for a while. So what we saw there is he was just arriving over the weekend in Odessa. Ghost, do you want to tell us why Odessa is so important? Pull up the map, please.
Yeah, if you want to share my screen. So there are a lot of different resources out there that chart out the conflict and chart out the as it's being reported in the news. And of course, we have to always keep in mind that we're in a narrative warfare, information warfare battle space. So the information could always be tainted. It can always be poisoned. But a lot of times the way I operate is I focus less on what's happening, the actuals on the ground. I focus more on what the public figures on all the different sides are saying and how they're interacting. A lot of times, if the conflicting sides are all agreeing on, and like if they're all reporting the same thing on a specific situation, that's a pretty good indication that something has happened to some extent that's true. But again, all warfare is deception, so we have to just understand that the information may not be completely accurate. This is a deepstatemap.live. and this isn't one that I'd use a lot, but Brady specifically requested the Odessa Transnistria region, and this is one of the resources that does have that mapped out. Just to give people, because this is all written in Ukrainian, or maybe it's Russian. So let me real quick just show everyone some context. Let me go over to, I have this other map. Where are we? Okay, so we're looking at Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's Ukraine. We have Odessa down here. All of these cities down here in the southern coast of the northern coast of the Black Sea, southern Ukraine, Odessa, Kherson, Mykolaiv. These are all Melitopol. These are all cities that were founded by Catherine the Great in the late 1700s. She was the Tsarina of Russia and a very, very close ally of the American founding fathers, particularly Ben Franklin. So all of these cities that we've heard about for the past 3+ years, longer than that if you've been tracking the Ukraine war, Mariupol being another one. These are all cities that she founded. They were all Russian cities originally, and they have, over the past 100 to 150 years, have been under or besieged, I guess you would say, by various subversive forces. One of those being Vladimir Lenin would be one of them. Another one would be Zayov Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky, who we've talked about before, Brady, was the guy who went to Palestine, Ukrainian who went to Palestine, a British mandate Palestine, formed the Irgun that became the IDF. Before he went to Palestine, he actually was based in Odessa and created some subversive militias in Odessa first. So that's the background on Odessa.
Yeah, I think the thing about this map that really stands out is this is the access to the Black Sea. This whole conflict has always been about natural gas pipelines. You know, they're called, who was it called? Obama called Russia a gas station?
Yes.
You know, gas station with a navy or something like that. Well, if Russia's cut off from the Black Sea, they cannot ship their gas and oil to the rest of the Mediterranean. When 2014 Maidan Revolution happened, Putin's he's not going to get shut off from the Black Sea, so they immediately sent their troops into Crimea, who had a referendum. Whether you believe that the Crimea wants to be part of Russia or not, they most certainly are. All of the conflict since 2014 with the Azov Battalion and their friends attacking the eastern part of Ukraine, Putin eventually was going to take that. He's taking that land back during this conflict. Right now, they're having huge gains on the ground. The Russian forces are. It's been a war of attrition. They're sending out so many drone attacks and missile attacks that the Ukrainians can't support their front lines at all. The lines could break any day now. It's entirely possible that Russia can actually take the Odessa region and cut off Ukraine altogether from the Black Sea. This would also give them direct access to Transnistria. There is a Transnistria separatist movement in Moldova. And we'll talk a little bit about that. If Transnistria would love to be reconnected with Russia, and that could be done if they take the entire Odessa region. That happens, the Ukraine becomes a landlocked backwater third world country, and all the Western investment into Ukraine, investment with a big air quote, probably becomes moot. So I find it incredibly important, striking.
And to give everyone some clarity.
Go ahead.
Sorry. To give everyone some clarity, the region that's highlighted in red right here on the center of the screen, that's Transnistria. It's on the border between Moldova and Ukraine. This city that's highlighted right there on the coast at the bottom of that highlighted region, that's Odessa. It's all written in Cyrillic. I tried to get them to translate it, try to get the site to translate to English, but it won't. So that's Odessa. And then this red region is that's highlighted is Transnistria that Brady's talking about.
Yep. So the fact that Pompeo would be flying into Odessa right now, of all times, is very interesting to me. Any thoughts, Colonel?
Well, I want to highlight what Ghost just said. So the people originally from this area in the underground networks that he just mentioned fit the exact definition of what we refer to as stay behind units using the strategy of tension. This is exactly what they did with the organization that he mentioned these people created in Palestine prior to the establishment of the state of Israel. They are terrorist organizations. That's the easiest way to describe them. They are stay behind type capability that orchestrates events, generally dressed up as someone that they want to accuse of doing the events, as we have learned throughout our study of Operation Gladio. That's what he's describing.
Yeah, and that really highlights the nonsense that Putin wants to take all of Ukraine, or Putin wants to take territory in Europe. It's going to invade. You do not have the manpower or resources to be an occupying force in this modern age. These stay behind the units they are way too destructive, way too potent. You do not want to be an occupying army. It's just not feasible. Russia doesn't have the population or a military to be an occupying. They need to take their territory and hold it. And that's basically, I have said from day one, I thought the plan would be to take Odessa. And I say might, because I don't know, they may not do it. I think they have the military capability of doing so at this point in time, if there's no ceasefire, which is, you're starting to see Ukraine come to the table a lot more. But last thing you want to do is have be an occupying force with a bunch of trained urban warfare guys like the Azov Battalion, because these guys do know how to fight in the streets, and they're very good, and they've been trained by the CIA.
And the Azov Battalion's heritage goes back to Hitler's Gehlen, Reinhard Gehlen, that set up the BND as a counterpart to Allen Dulles' CIA. Their patriarch, if you will, Bandera and Stetsko, were the stay-behinds that were left in Ukraine after World War II to do exactly what they're doing today. And it is not a coincidence that after the 2014 Maidan massacre, that in the immediate aftermath of that Kolomoisky, who we mentioned on Friday, paid to move the Azov Battalion into the governorship that he was given by the new administration that the CIA installed in Ukraine. He moved them up to his area, which just coincidentally borderlines the Donbass region. And what did we see in the immediate aftermath of 2014? Well, according to the New York Times, who admitted in an article published February 25th, 2024, the CIA had set up 20-something underground CIA facilities, not even pretending that they were Ukrainian. They set them up not along which the article initially says, but later on in the article admits that they didn't set them up because the pretext for setting them up was that this new government that was installed by the CIA in Ukraine was going to need some stability. It says in the article initially that they were set up on the Eastern Front to guard against Russian interference, but they didn't set them up on the Eastern Front. They set them up along the line of the Donbass region. And why is that important? Because the movement of the Azov Battalion forward into the Eastern region was to attack the Donbass region, which is primarily ethnic Russian, not to attack or to secure the eastern border, or they would have put them on the eastern border. They did not. They put them on the Donbass region's border, which is the western part of that region, and they were used then to launch basically stay behind type terrorist attacks into the Donbass region. And why did they do that? They did that to bait Russia into moving into the Donbass region to protect ethnic Russian people. This is exactly what they did in Afghanistan with a coup that happened in Afghanistan that baited the Russians into Afghanistan, that both Kissinger and Brzezinski said was to give the Soviet Union their Vietnam. So they are basically carrying out a historical destabilization inside of Russia, which is exactly what they did in Afghanistan. They're just using Ukraine And that's why history is so important, because you start to recognize patterns and you can piece together even the mainstream media's version if you know your history.
Very good.
Yeah, and that's some excellent background, and I'll provide a little more. From my research, from what I've found is I mentioned last week how the British East India Company really cultivated this idea of proxy war in the 1730s when they were fighting the French in India, and it was actually the French, as I understand it, who originally went to these Indian warlords and recruited them to fight the British. And then the British realized, oh, this is actually a great idea. Like, instead of sending British troops into India, why don't we just bring gold down here and buy off the warlords and get them to use their soldiers to kill one another? And so that kind of became how the operations went in India for 100 years or so. And from what I could discern, and by the way, when Cornwallis surrendered in Yorktown to George Washington, he was then plucked out of Virginia and sent to India, and he became the governor of India, like to fix what had been screwed up by the East India Company in India. And pretty much what they were doing is they had these pension plans for all of these warlords. When they would buy one off, am I lagging really bad?
Yeah, you're glitching. Once you bounce and come back in.
Okay, I'll bounce. I'll be back in a second.
Yep, and we'll keep them entertained in the meantime.
And let me reemphasize something here. The tactic that he was just describing is exactly what the British then did into China with the Opium Wars. This is all connected. And instead of using gold as the currency, they were using opium as the currency to create pockets of resistance against Mao. And that's how you end up with Chiang Kai-shek and the revolution, the internal civil war that was happening in China. And again, it's all about patterns and recognize how they continue to repeat themselves. And I can't emphasize this enough. This is why understanding history is so important.
Yeah, they're doing it to this very day in China with the Uyghurs. They're training their paramilitary people to cause trouble in China as they go back across the border. That's this whole divide and conquer. These people's ability, their knowledge of how to rule and divide populations. It goes back centuries, and they're pissed. They repeat the patterns over and over again.
Yeah, and that's how we ended up with Taiwan and the installation of Chiang Kai-shek, who administered Taiwan as a dictator for 40 years, as we already talked about. In addition to the Uyghurs, they used the Tibetans. They flew the Tibetans in the dead of night into Colorado and taught them terrorist tactics, and then embedded them in Tibet to launch operations against China as well.
So when I decided to start digging into this, why is Pompeo into Odessa? The first thing I want to do is, okay, we know who Mike Pompeo is, don't we? But let's look into his background. So the first place I always look is actually Wikipedia, because they have a lot of high-level blurbs and it's accurate, and they have a lot of linked sources. And so let's just take a look at Pompeo's wiki page and see if there's anything interesting about him. And I've got that right here. You got that on screen?
Yep.
Okay, Mike Pompeo, born in 1963, American retired politician, served as director of CIA and Secretary of State, same job. He's also in the U.S. House of Representatives 2011 to 2017. Graduated U.S. Military Academy, became an Army officer, blah, blah, blah. Came from Kansas. His nickname is Kansas, okay? Once a critic of Trump, who he called authoritarian, he shifted into a supporter after he became the nominee. Then becomes a Secretary of State and CIA. He focused U.S.-China relations in opposition to China's policy regarding the oppression of the Uyghurs. Okay, so, yeah. What do we just say about the Uyghurs? Is China oppressing them? Or are they subversives sent in, basically to undermine China?
Subversives trained in Nepal, sent in to China to destabilize them.
Goes on, he advocated moving the American embassy to Jerusalem and the withdrawal of the Iran deal, and the nuclear deal with Iran, which may or may not have been a great idea. Let's see. Second date, he declared that the U.S. human rights policy should prioritize religious liberty and property rights. Talked about the Abraham Accords. This is all stuff we all pretty much know. He also backed Trump. He supported Trump in the efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. That's not what they were trying to do. They were questioning whether the election was run legally. But the fact that he backed Trump was a good point in his favor. Now, mind you, while Pompeo is director of the CIA and Secretary of State, the CIA is actively working against Trump during the Russiagate stuff. And Pompeo, as a director, sure as heck knew what was going on. So I've never had a whole lot of confidence in him. But that being said, let's see if we have any other fun connections. It's from Orange, California, a place close to my home, or original home. Graduated from Los Amigos High School. Played basketball, a forward. Went to West Point, and he majored in engineering management. He's a classmate of Brian Bulato and Ulrich Brechtbol, which is interesting. They later helped him found Thayer Aerospace. Ghost, you want to pull up what you can on Thayer Aerospace? There may be something interesting there.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. From 86 to 91, he served in the Army. Interestingly enough, he drove tanks along the Berlin Wall. That was his job. 94, he gets a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School. Interesting. How many of our deep state actors have gone through Harvard Law?
A lot of them.
Ivy League in general, but yes, for sure, Harvard, Yale.
Yeah, the pipeline we found was going through secret societies. A lot of these people go to Yale, get Skull and Bones, and then for undergrad, and then they go to Harvard Law. And that's happened time and time again with Bonesman. Where this gets interesting to me, after graduating from law school, he works as a lawyer for Williams and Connolly. You guys familiar with Williams and Connolly?
I've heard that name before.
Generally, when we click on these law firms, the two things you want to look for is who they've represented and who are their alumni.
Yeah.
Let's check out Williams and Connolly real quick.
And I'd like to say, too, when you're looking at like organizations like Thayer Aerospace, you always have to look at their board of directors and who funds them. The Koch brothers are the primary investors in his aerospace company.
Yep. Okay, so this firm has been around since '67, so it's not an old firm, but apparently they've been involved in some pretty high value cases. They were the successful defense of U.S. President Bill Clinton's impeachment.
Oh boy. Okay. Yep. Keep going.
Representation of Enron's law firm Vincent and Elkins. The Kazakh Grokster file trading litigation. That was huge when it came to musical property, intellectual property rights.
And let me add about the whole Enron thing. I've done this kept coming up in my research with Operation Gladio and how they fund these operations using basically these companies like BCCI and things like that to the savings and loan fiasco to transfer large segments of wealth into their coffers. And Enron did exactly that. And so this law firm's connection to them is a huge red flag to me.
Yeah.
Now I know why I know this law firm's name. If you want to share my screen, this is what I thought, but I wanted to verify this before I said it.
Yeah, go ahead. You can take it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but so you may recall that recently Trump issued an executive order to target Perkins Coie.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
This is the law firm that's representing Perkins Coie against the Trump administration.
All right, let's jump back into the clients because this is great. That's a nice find. Okay, Williams and Connolly. Am I back? Tell me when I'm back up.
Take me down. Yeah, take me down, and then you can put him up.
Okay. They're the defense of the Vioxx cases. Counselor for the plaintiffs in U.S. versus Microsoft antitrust remedy trial. Firm represented Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North during the Iran-Contra affair.
Oh
Perfect.
my gosh.
You ready for this? And John Hinckley, the would-be assassin of Ronald Reagan. Friendly reminder that the Hinckley family was in business with Bush's brother in one of the savings and loan scandals in the 1980s.
And they had dinner the night before, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right before they shot Reagan.
Yeah.
All right. So let's look at some of their clientele. I'll just go through it quickly because it just screams deep state. Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, James Patterson, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Michelle Obama, Laura Bush, Bob Woodward from Woodward and Bernstein, Sarah Palin, Dick Deep State Cheney, Alan Greenspan, former head of the Fed, Katharine Graham, Ben Bernanke, another head of the Fed, Paul Ryan, Tim Russert, Barbara Streisand, Jack Welch, Khaled Hosseini, Bill Walton, assume that's the basketball player, Mitch McConnell, Jake Tapper, and others.
And Katharine Graham ran the Washington Post when it was outed as being basically a CIA front.
Corporate clients. We got Google, Groomer Disney, Samsung, Intel, Bank of America. Oh, the Carlyle Group.
Yeah, and there's a. We'll keep going. When you're finished, I have something to add.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the Carlyle Group basically basically a hedge fund that invests in defense companies, and they got all a bunch of U.S. intel people involved in it. So basically, they know where the conflicts are going to start. They encourage the conflicts because they profit from it.
And George H.W. Bush and James Baker was the ones that went over and arranged for Saudi investment into the Carlyle Group while they're supplying all of the military aid to the Middle East. They are profiting from it through the Carlyle Group. It's like a money laundering operation. So we give them military aid over to Saudi. Saudi uses them to purchase military equipment. All the while, all of them are getting rich because the Carlyle Group owns large chunks of stock in the defense industry.
They also represented Elizabeth Holmes in the Theranos criminal trial. And of course, as Ghost told us, Perkins Coie hired them to defend itself after being targeted and ordered by President Trump.
Yep.
Let's look at some of their alumni. Oh, Elena Kagan.
Hold on a second. Did you want to add something to that, Ghost, before we move on?
Well, so there's a guy. Last summer, I was doing a lot of digging on. Well, at the end of last summer, there's an interesting story that came up about Nicolas Maduro, and it led me down this rabbit hole that took me back in 2017. And the TLDR on it is that I'm pretty sure Maduro was given a laptop from hell in March. That's like the way it's kind of described. It's not that exact language, but a laptop from hell by the scorned ex-wife of one of his oil officials. I guess he was cheating on her or something. She brought him this laptop. She said, my husband's corrupt. Here's all the goods on him. Maduro takes the laptop, hires a lawyer, like an American lawyer, to pursue the corruption that's on this laptop. And then 1 year later, March 2018, this lawyer files civil action lawsuits in American court. And for those listening, that's basically like filing criminal charges in a civil court setting, like corruption, etc., against 40 of the top oil executives in the world, basically. And that would include people from Glencore, Trafigura, like the big names, the big asset management groups. All of these cases are eventually dismissed by the courts, but many of these guys are later prosecuted. Years later, they're forced to resign. Many of them at Glencore are forced to resign, including the CEO, the president. And I think that guy who was forced to resign in 2019 was arrested last August and is now facing criminal charges. It appears to me that Maduro basically kicked off this like massive campaign that Trump has taken up the mantle against. And what led me down this rabbit hole was last summer when Maduro and Elon Musk started having this really silly like WWE style fight online where they were like challenging each other to like a wrestling match, and they were going to shave each other's mustaches and like send each other to space. And it got really, really silly. But if you want to share my screen, Colonel, this is the take that I wrote about it in the Badlands News Brief. This was on August 2nd of last year. And the story I was responding to was this one, which is UK charges Glencore's billionaire ex-head of oil over corrupt payments. Okay. And the corrupt payments, by the way, were related to a number of places, but namely Venezuela. So where this gets interesting is the lawyer that I mentioned earlier that Maduro hired to file the original civil action lawsuit was a guy named Bowie, David Bowie. I think I'm saying his name right, but it's Boies. Okay. Now, Bowie is pretty well known. He's billed as, quote, the most famous lawyer in the world. I had never heard of him, but I'm relatively young. I recognize that. One of the reasons he's famous is because in 2001, the Justice Department went after Bill Gates for the whole Microsoft thing. And for older people may remember that in 2001, Bill Gates was indicted on, or I don't know if he was indicted, but he was targeted by the Justice Department for the accusation of antitrust stuff. And basically what he was doing is he was going to manufacturers that were making computers, and he was coercing them into forcing the operating system that ended up on the computer to be Microsoft as opposed to his competitors. And so now everyone, like most people, use Microsoft, and that kind of is a spinoff of what was happening back then. So the Justice Department goes after Bill Gates, and they hire this guy, David Bowie, to do this. Now he has like I listed off his clients in this because I said, look, I don't know if this guy is like a good guy, bad guy. It's hard to judge lawyers by their clients because the people who tend to need lawyers are people who are engaged in in wrongdoing, right? So it's I do think that if you have a pattern of like the same people that you're representing, then that says a lot.
Well, yeah,
but the reason I say all this is if you scroll up to the top of Williams Conley Wikipedia page, I noticed it lists that lawsuit or that court case, the United States versus Microsoft, at the very top. And exactly. I don't know if this guy was involved in that, but I'm trying to figure out if he actually worked for Williams Conley.
So, and of course, Microsoft founded by Bill Gates, who basically is all in on the Great Reset theory and vaccinations and all that. So don't ignore that connection as well.
So let me bring this home. I think his name is pronounced Boyce, but
okay.
He also, which is where I recognized his name, he was involved. His law firm was involved in the negotiated settlement with none other than AIG. Okay, I just talked about CV Star and AIG on Alpha Warrior Show last Wednesday. It is one of the most corrupt organizations. It has been used as a CIA front since World War II. And this is the law firm. And this guy actually was involved in Theranos and Jeffrey Epstein's victims, to include the one that supposedly just committed suicide. He's been involved in all of the lawsuits against tobacco companies and Harvey Weinstein.
Did you get into?
I have.
Go ahead, Ghost.
I'm sorry. I have some more. That's great. That's great information. And yeah, he's connected to Harvey Weinstein. Theranos is another one. So it appears, scratching at this a little bit, it appears that those court cases, the Microsoft court cases, are actually set, like they're two separate court cases with Microsoft. So I think one of them was David Boyce was one of them because he has his own law firm called Boyce Schiller and Flexner, and yep. Then the Williams Conley one was actually a separate court case. And I don't have the background on that one, but here's an interesting little wrinkle. These two law firms, Boyce, Schiller, Flexner, has actually found itself in major legal battles against Williams-Connolly on a number of occasions, including right now, Rumble and Google are in court fighting it out. And representing Google is Williams-Connolly, and representing Rumble is Boyce Schiller Flexner.
And can I just say that controlling both sides of an argument is one of their key tactics?
Yes, correct. And here's that. I have that story right here. It's like we have an update on that from just 2 weeks ago. If we want to look at that real quick,
it's on.
Yeah. So it says Rumble adds David Boyce to legal team in $2 billion antitrust battle with Google. Video sharing platform Rumble has enlisted the high-profile litigator David Boyce to bolster its legal team in a major antitrust lawsuit against Google, according to court documents reviewed by Reuters. The addition of Boyce, renowned for his roles in the U.S. government's 1990s antitrust case against Microsoft and the 2000 Bush versus Gore Supreme Court battle, marks a significant development in the lawsuit by Rumble against Google in 2021. The suit, filed in federal court in Oakland, California, accuses Google of stifling competition in the online video market and seeks more than $2 billion in damages. Boyce will join a team led by attorneys from Cadwalader, Wickershire, and Taft.
We know Cadwalader. We've been through that one in our secret societies.
Okay, interesting. Nicholas Gravante Jr. Gravante practiced at Boyce Schiller for over 2 decades and previously collaborated with Boyce at the elite firm Kravitz, Swain and Moore. According to Reuters, Gravante has also represented clients such as Hunter Biden and Alan Weisselberg, former CFO of the Trump organization. That's notable. The core of Rumble's lawsuit is what I want to get to. The core of Rumble's lawsuit centers on allegations that Google has used its dominance to search and mobile ecosystems to unfairly promote YouTube, its own video platform. As Reuters reports, the suit claims that Google manipulated search results to give preferential treatment to YouTube content and has made deals with Android device manufacturers to block Rumble from being pre-installed on smartphones. That, I think, is like an echo of what Bill Gates was doing with Microsoft 25 years ago. That's really
I'd agree with that.
That's really interesting.
On that note, I've been speculating that in fact I'm going to take a short interest in Alphabet, Google's parent stock, because Google, with AI out there, AI is so much better than Google search ever was. Google's whole monopoly is their dominance in the search, and it's done. It's over.
I mean for the past year, if you go to Google, like if a news story pops up on X and it's like everyone's talking about it, you go to Google and you type it in, and you'll get news stories from 6 months before that show up. It's not even like they're not even giving you news stories related to the event from the past 3 weeks. They're giving you news stories from months ago. I mean, it is a terrible, terrible search engine now.
Yeah, they manipulated their algorithm several years back, and it's been rendered useless.
Yep.
And you'll find it's really hard to argue somebody. Well, it's going to be great. No, but the term Google, go Google it. It's going to disappear from my lexicon, and I'm going to celebrate that day.
And then finally, here's another. If you want to share my screen one last time, this is from my take from last August, and this is something that had the reason that I really wanted to post this take, even though I was talking about Maduro, and the guy being arrested at Glencore 2 days before I posted this take. So that would have been the end of July. Delta had just announced that it was retaining Boyce to go after CrowdStrike and Microsoft due to that recent that outage. Remember, there was an outage that Delta had to ground all of its flights one day.
Yeah,
and apparently the accusation is that CrowdStrike, which is the firm that was involved allegedly in the election integrity stuff, was involved in that. So
let's go a little deeper into CrowdStrike, because their co-founder is Dmitry Alperovich, who sits on the Atlantic Council, who's going to come up again later today, and also happens to be Ukrainian, where Pompeo happens to be visiting. So don't skip over that. Did you see the Virginia Jew-free Prince Charles thing? A little blurb there? That was interesting.
What you talking about in the thing I'm showing, or some?
Yeah, it was. You scrolled past it, but I guess he'd also represented.
Yeah, so he also pro bono represented Gouffre against Prince Andrew. So it sounds like they settled the suit before Andrew was deposed, which deposing him would have been massive, because it would have forced him into a situation where he has to answer questions under oath, right? Um,
And that
so
has
you
to be-
know that yeah. It's not like all this stuff about Boyce. You could read one way or the other. You could read it as him being a white hat. You could read it as him being a black hat. It could also just be a guy responding to clients, responding to incentives. So gray hat at best, maybe.
Well, the real takeaway is that he's a very well-connected lawyer who knows everything that's going on behind the scenes, both in the business world, and it looks like he gets into some other avenues as well.
Because during discovery, he is getting the opposition information as well as his client's information. So he is pivotal to and what I find most interesting about the timing of your research on Maduro isn't that when all of the CIA they were manipulating the media in Venezuela. They were launching attacks from Colombia into Venezuela and basically telling us that was Venezuelans' own internal terrorist, when in fact it was what I know to be CIA-trained terrorist militia in Colombia that was their border down in the southeast area is porous with people flowing over into Venezuela.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I believe, if I recall, there were Green Berets who were arrested in Venezuela that connected to that. And Matt Arrett, my co-host, who Brady actually introduced me to Matt, not personally, but just his content years ago. And so it's kind of serendipitous that I do a show with him now. But him and his wife have done deep research in how the Green Berets have been involved in a lot of these regime change operations in South America, Central America. And you bring up Venezuela and the conflict with Colombia. Guyana will be the other one. So on the other border of Venezuela, on the eastern border, they have Guyana, which is the only country, by the way, in Central and South America that's part of the British Commonwealth. Very interesting. And the dispute there stems from the fact that all these countries have, a certain distance out into the ocean that they can claim as their territory. And so there's a massive oil belt that runs in the water, like north of Venezuela, that goes into Guyana. And so Guyana basically is saying that, there's disputes now where Venezuela is not allowed to dig for oil in its own waters, because Guyana claims that it's actually its territorial waters, and really by proxy, the City of London's territorial waters. So all this stuff is connected. It's very convoluted, but it seems to me that Guyana is another like Ukraine, Taiwan proxy for the regime, for the City of London.
Well, and Guyana is where Jim Jones set up a terrorist training camp that never gets talked about because of the Jonestown incident, where Congressman Leo Ryan was assassinated. And so Guyana is pivotal to all of this. And that is, if you go north from where Jim Jones terrorist training camp was set up a little bit, that's supposedly where this prison that the Transdenagra terrorist group came from. But it's literally right on the border with Guyana.
Yep. And if you want to share my screen, this is like, there is some other like serendipity about this for me, because just randomly I noticed that CARICOM, which is like the Caribbean nations version of, I mean, it's not like the EU, but it's something similar where it's like the regional block of all the countries. They went to Saudi Arabia in the fall of, I think it was 2023, and they were hosted by MBS. He took them to that suburb Diriyah, like rolled out the red carpet for him, had this massive convention, and basically was saying he wanted to establish like deep ties with the Caribbean. And then suddenly right after that was when Guyana, like these militias popped up in Guyana and started invading Venezuela.
Yes.
And so like, that's when like my red flag went off, because I was already sharing that information, like sharing just, oh, this is interesting. Look, they're going to, and my big interest in it wasn't really the CARICOM thing. It was just the fact that we were getting these really nice videos of these ruins, Diriyah, which is the suburb of Riyadh, and like the ancestral homeland or hometown of the Saudis. So that's the reason I was sharing it. It wasn't really because of the CARICOM thing, but then all of a sudden we had CARICOM involved in this blow up with between Guyana and Venezuela. So I don't know how it all shakes out, but it really feels to me that Guyana is used as a proxy to prevent Venezuela from accessing its own natural resources.
And what's amazing about this is how it ties to Ukraine, as you were just pointing out, because it's about oil. So as soon as Maduro gets access to all this incriminating evidence about the corruption of oil executives, you have this massive attack on Maduro, and we're led to believe that he's illegitimate using the same voting machines that we use in America. So how is he voted in illegitimately with the same voting machines that work perfectly in America?
Yeah.
All right, let me get us back on track here. That was a fun little diversion. If I can get my screen back up. And by the way, I've been diving off a lot of those islands that you're right off the coast of Venezuela.
Really
gorgeous water.
Margarita Island is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been.
Okay, back to Williams and Connolly. We're going to look at their alumni. How about 2 Supreme Court justices just from this one, Elena Kagan and Brett Kavanaugh? How about Jeff Kindler, the former CEO of Pfizer? Heard about them at all during the COVID?
Wait. I'm sorry. Kavanaugh worked for Williams and Connolly?
Yep. So did Elena Kagan.
Wow.
2 Supreme Court justices, 1 firm. Of course, Ghost, you weren't with us, but we've got ties to skull and bones of 3 Chief Justices of the Supreme Court and 4 other Supreme Court justices. 3 is a lot, considering we've only had 17 Supreme Court justices in history, and 3 of them are alumni of 1 secret society of 1 college, which is a little bit coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
And you got a bunch of these other judges. You know, people complain about all these circuit judges. Well, it's their backgrounds all in these big mega corporate law firms. All right, going back to Pompeo real quick, and then we'll jump to what he's doing there. Moves to Wichita, where his West Point friends, Bub Bellato and Breckbull, acquire 3 aircraft parts manufacturers. So they're in the war profiteering business. Sells out to a big investment from Koch Industries. And of course, here we have Dallas-based Cardinal Investment and Bain and Company. Who's Bain and Company?
Romney.
That's Mitt Romney's. Mitt Romney's. Mitt Romney, who also has a huge connection to Ukraine because his right-hand man, God, I'm dropping the ball on his name, but he also sat on the board of Burisma with Hunter Biden.
Doesn't his it's like his son or his nephew is on that board, or is it his right-hand man?
It's his right-hand man, and I'll get his name for you in a second here because he's a former spook. He's a CIA guy.
Okay. And you can also connect it to Netanyahu because when Netanyahu got out of the IDF, he went to Boston to study architecture at MIT. His roommate in Boston was Mitt Romney. They became like brothers, they describe it. They basically say that they can like communicate like telepathically, like they finish each other's sentences. You know, there's some kind of weird relationship there. It's lifelong. And then Mitt Romney was the one who was able to get Netanyahu on Boston television to start talking about terrorism, talking about the Middle East, kind of seeding the idea of what terrorism is, explaining it to the American public because the American public didn't really know about it. And at the time, he didn't go by Netanyahu. His name was Ben Natai. And so him and Mitt Romney have remained lifelong friends. And then you kind of go back to the weird relationship that was between President Trump and Mitt Romney at the very beginning of his first administration. Remember when Mitt Romney was like coming and going from the White House and it looked like Romney was going to join the administration. And then Trump told him to pound sand. There's a weird just like triangle there between Romney, Trump, and Netanyahu.
I'm looking it up right now. Who's the Romney tied to Burisma? I should have a name. I've said the name a million times. You want to do a search for that?
Yep, I can do that.
Okay, so the one I that's about enough for him on WikiLeaks. Got some good leads. It's another really good site called WikiSpooks, and you can find a lot of gems in this one. So wikispooks.com. Typed in Mike Pompeo. Talk about his background. It gets good here, though. Goes to Harvard, lawyer, blah, blah, blah. Became a consultant for the Koch brothers. He's a member of the Tea Party movement. Here's a great quote from him, a CIA director. I was a cadet. What's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was a CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. We had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
Yeah, that's a pretty famous quote. Cooper Black, by the way, is the guy you're looking for.
Thank you. Cooper Black. And pull up Cooper Black's background. It's all kinds of CIA.
Yeah. So it looks like he was the counterterrorism center director in the years surrounding 9/11 attacks. Yep. And then he became the ambassador at large and coordinator for counterterrorism at the State Department under Bush. Resigned in 2004.
But he's there on Burisma right when the whole Ukraine stuff starts.
Yeah, man. Cartoon. He's in Sudan. He's at the station chief in Sudan until 1995. Wow. Because I can provide some. Wow. Okay. This is
what happens to me every time I look at any one of these people. Is they're critical to all of the other dominoes that have happened before. They show up in all the same places.
Yeah, Cooper Black's another one of our Forrest Gumps. They just, no matter where they go, something happens.
Yeah, and that Sudan connection is wild because I've been digging a lot on Sudan lately because they recently finalized an agreement that was first proposed by Putin in 2017. And I don't know if I've told you too about this, if we talked about this before, but it was for Russia to build its first military base ever in Africa, which is an insane that's an insane data point that Russia has never had a formal military base on the continent of Africa ever. It's like it has to be one of the only European countries, or it's pseudo-European country that has never had one. And so Putin proposes this to Sudan in 2017. Suddenly, there is a lot of conflict in Sudan. There are a couple different coups. The CIA is in control for a couple of years, then back to them being overthrown. When the CIA is overthrown in 2022, it appears that they start reevaluating this agreement. Suddenly, the Biden administration gets very, very interested in Sudan and reestablishes a diplomatic mission there, because what I went and read was that in 1995, we actually shut down our embassy and ended all diplomacy with Sudan because of all the instability there. And we restored it in 2022. We took a member of the senior executive service, the SES, which you both know is the deep state. Those are the highest ranking people in the State Department. And for some reason, a guy from the SES becomes the ambassador to Sudan, which seems kind of like a demotion almost for someone like that, unless, of course, it's a very important position. That guy then starts publicly threatening the government of Sudan and says, if you accept this deal from Russia, there are going to be serious consequences for your government. And then, of course, in February of 23, they do accept that deal in principle. They sign the agreement. And 2 months later, a massive civil war breaks out in Sudan, which is still ongoing to this day. They just finally finalized the details of the deal and how the Navy base is going to be built and operate in January, right when Trump came into office. So again, don't know the specifics. We don't know exactly how the picture isn't 100%, in 4K high def, but it certainly is coming into focus that Sudan is very important to this whole chessboard, and it has everything to do with Russia having a naval presence in the Red Sea, which I would argue is one of the most. There's so many different intelligence agencies operating in the Red Sea on these tiny little islands that are down near Yemen, and we have talked about that before for sure. Yes. But I had no idea that so that's to say that I just learned reading this that Cooper Black was the CIA station chief in 1995 when the diplomatic mission in Sudan was shut down.
Yes.
I would add that Russia does have a very strong presence in Africa and have for a while because of the Wagner Group. They've got a huge presence. Yeah,
huge presence, but no formal military base. That's the difference. Yeah.
Got it.
So they were using Syria, like the two military bases they've had there since the Cold War, as the launching point, which then begs the question of like, whoa, the Syrian civil war. There's another incentive to overthrow Assad.
Okay, there's a couple more things from Wikispooks on Pompeo worth looking at, and then I'm going to jump to the meeting that he's attending. Am I on screen?
You are now.
Okay. So in Syria, remember the chemical weapons attack that never happened?
Yes. Well,
Pompeo is the one who said it did. He goes, the next day, the president called the cabinet together, and then he turned to me and asked what we had learned. Several of us shared what we knew. I told him that the intelligence community had concluded that chemical weapons had indeed been used in the attack and launched by the Syrian regime. This is a lie. We know it's a lie because what is the OPCW? It's one of those. Basically, it's concluded that they were not. This is the only neutral assessment of that. Assad did not use chemical weapons. They used that as an excuse to overthrow his regime. And then this ties directly to Ukraine, because that whole Syria thing, this was going to be the pipeline that was going to rival the Russian pipeline to get gas to Europe. And that didn't happen because of Syria.
Yes, that's a huge deal. That's a big reason why it happened, and it goes back to what you were saying before about the Black Sea and the Mediterranean being a major important transport route for the oil.
I bring that up because this is Pompeo that was part of that from day one.
Yep.
Okay, a few more. A quote by Pompeo talking about biological weapon and terrorism. He goes, "This is not about retribution. This matter is going forward. We are in a live exercise here to get this right." To which President Trump retorted, "You should have told us." Boy, have they ever released a biological weapon on the world?
Just a few times.
Yeah, at least once.
Do we have any biolabs in Ukraine?
I've heard we've had a few, yeah. According to Victoria Nuland, of course.
So, thank you, Vicky. So this Wikispooks always does this little section called events participated in. So he's been to Bilderberg 2019. The Halifax International Security Forum. It's a spooky conference in Canada. Got a Munich Security Conference, which you'd expect him to go to. Nothing really special here. And a bunch of documents. So there's a lot to find on Pompeo, but the reason we looked at him in the first place is because he just landed in Odessa. Now, why was he in Odessa? Because he's going to something called the Black Sea Security Forum. And we're going to have some fun in there. So I'll pull that up on screen. This is the meeting he's going at. The Great Chessboard mid-game. Black Sea Security Forum, an issue by a group of Ukrainian parliamentarians in 2024. The Black Sea Security Forum in Odessa has become the first and largest geopolitical event in the south of Ukraine since the start of Russia's invasion. The inaugural forum, which brought together key figures from national governments, international institutions, and the expert community, marked a pivotal moment in the regional security dialogue with the Black Sea Security Forum 2024 summary. It offered a detailed overview of the event. Our mission: to establish the annual international platform for addressing security challenges in the Black Sea region and beyond, a focal point of intense geopolitical contention. It's led by Ukrainian MP Goncharenko, et cetera, et cetera. Why Odessa? Odessa is Ukraine's maritime gateway, a hotspot of global geopolitics, the biggest city in the south of Ukraine, and one of the biggest ports in the Black Sea region. It serves as a nexus for trade, finance, culture, and Eastern Europe. Like I said at the beginning of the show, there's a decent chance that Russia might take the whole Odessa region.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. That's actually, I mean, for different reasons, I kind of speculated that, but that's a fascinating additional layer of support to enhance that thinking.
And Pompeo is attending this. All right, let's do what the Colonel said and take a look at their advisory board. And these look like all Ukrainians, members of parliament. Fedorenko, we know that name.
Can you provide context on Fedorenko?
Go ahead.
That name comes up in just about every one of these nefarious things that's happened in Ukraine, as far as both with the Hunter Biden issue, the Maidan massacre. It's just a name that comes up repeatedly.
Interesting.
See if we got anything else here. We got a chairman. Who's that going to be? That's his Goncharenko guy. What's his background? Anything interesting? Nothing jumps off the page with him. What's Pace?
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, Pace.
Anything names jump off the page here? Not really. All right, here's where it gets fun. We get to the partners. Lead sponsor is Lord Ashcroft. Let's pull up a wiki. Let's pull up a Lord Ashcroft real quick. Give me 1 second. I'll have him up here because he's interesting. He's one of the richest guys in England. He also happens to be really connected in Belize, which again is on the Caribbean.
Which is the only Latin American country that was not couped, by the way.
It's part of the British Commonwealth.
Part of Britain.
What? Oh, Belize is.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I revised my earlier statement. It must be Guyana. Must be the only country in South America, and Belize, I guess, is the country.
Well, we overthrew Guyana.
Yeah.
Twice. Yeah. Belize is the only one that we've not overthrown.
So it's always been a part of the British Commonwealth then.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So Ashcroft is nobility. He's called Lord Ashcroft. He's a life peer 2000. It's interesting. He holds dual British and Belizean nationality and is a belonger of the Turks and Caicos Islands. So,
a question, Brady. What are the banking regulations of Turks and Caicos and Belize?
It's a good question. Hold the thought because we'll get to, because there's going to be a blurb about the banking here when we get to him. But they are very, it's interesting. I've been diving in Belize too. It's wonderful. It's absolutely gorgeous diving. It's where the Great Blue Hole is, about an hour and a half boat ride off the coast. It's one of my best days of diving ever. Belize, but almost everyone in Belize speaks English. So when you're visiting the Caribbean, that's one of the few places where it's primary English speaking. A lot of people in California were investing in Belize in the mid 2010 or so, and all the advertisements were, it's really safe in Belize, because they've never defaulted on their debt. So I look it up, and it turns out they just defaulted on their debt in 2009. And I bring this up because every single time a country defaults on their debt, the first thing they start doing is nationalizing foreign investment in real estate. So I would not put a dime into Belize myself because, well, they just defaulted less than a little over a decade ago. Okay, there's something interesting about him in banking. He's big in the British cars. He's taken a majority stake in Lotus cars. Here we have it. It was eventually sold to an MBO backed by Hawley and financed by Bain Capital, Mitt Romney's firm. Interesting connection, huh?
Yeah, that is interesting.
What did it say about ADT Security?
We're just right here.
Yeah.
It bought ADT Security Service, the largest electronic security company in the United States.
Which is the best way to spy on anybody.
Sure. The company sold its North American-based facility service to Denmark's ISSAS. It's in Beechcraft King Air. All right, here it goes. In September 26, BCA was bought by the UK-based investment banking arm of private bank Samuel Montague and Company, a division of HSBC.
Oh my gosh. And HSBC is one of the biggest money launderers for the CIA and their drug operations that's left.
100%. That's why I brought it up. And he's got a bunch of more bleed stuff. Anyway, that's Lord Ashcroft. So he's there.
Yeah, and Matt always likes to point out that HSBC, I believe, is presented as a Hong Kong bank. Is that right?
Yes.
But it's actually a London-based bank.
Correct.
Absolutely.
It was created during the throes of the whole opium, well, even before that, but used for that, even for Britain or the UK when they owned or had the lease, whatever you call it, on Hong Kong, which they got as a prize for the initial Boxer Wars for shipping Indian opium into China.
And we're now getting a rerun of the opium wars with the influx of fentanyl into America.
Correct.
Yep. Which they're blaming exclusively on China, but I suspect that it's probably more of a transnational criminal organization that's manufacturing it and flooding it.
Well, what's interesting, the research that I did into the illegal fentanyl, and people need to understand there's two types of fentanyl. There's medical grade fentanyl that is produced in China and shipped through real bills of lading into medical facilities in the United States. They also sell the product that you make fentanyl. The people that are making the fentanyl are in Mexico under an apparatus that was set up by the CIA to traffic drugs like opium, heroin, cocaine into America. They have now been buying in bulk those ingredients, and the illegal fentanyl that's coming into America is made in Mexico.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes through Canada too, which is interesting. I know. Okay, so back into these other partners for this forum. You guys are going to get a kick out of this. There's the institutional partners.
Adenauer. Oh my God.
Enlighten us.
Well, Konrad Adenauer is the guy that was the first chancellor of Germany. He's the one that hired Reinhard Gehlen and set up the B&D, which is the CIA's counterpart. He is the guy that was working with McCloy when they were pardoning all of the Nazis post World War II that had death sentences.
And not only that, but he was the president of the Prussian State Council. Okay, interesting. So there's a Prussia connection.
Yeah.
All right, going down further. Media partners, Ukrainian.
And he's considered one of the founding fathers of the European Union.
Yes, he was.
It's something I don't want on my tombstone. All right. We got some media partners and supporting partners. What do we have here? Oh, AEI, the American Enterprise Institute.
Another
CIA. The IRI, International Republican Institute. Who's the IRI?
Another CIA front established by Ronald Reagan under the National Endowment for Democracy that John McCain, the entire time he was a sitting senator for 25 years, ran that. And he was there under the IRI funding the Maidan massacre in Ukraine the night the massacre happened. He was there and funded the support to that massacre under the banner of IRI. And if you go to the IRI's Wikipedia page and go down to the very bottom of it, you will see all of the funding that they did to destabilize several different countries on behalf of the CIA. It is a CIA front, of which Lindsey Graham, who just was recently in Ukraine as well, is a director.
Okay, I have a little bit more on Adenauer if it's not too derailing. Looks like he started off as a strong opponent of Hitler.
They say.
But he advocated that the Nazis should become part of the Prussian government and should join the Prussian government. Then the official story, to your point, is like he was dismissed as the mayor of Cologne, the Prussian city. He was his bank accounts were frozen. He had no money. He was homeless, no job. He had to go hide out in a monastery. However, in like his personal diary, Hitler expressed great admiration for him, and said that he basically said he was like a great man, but because of his public persona and in the optics, there's no way he could ever be a part of the Nazi government. So there's a weird little little tip there. But yeah, that kind of supports some of the theorizing I've done, that I think that the Prussian government kind of like similar to how the East India Company dissolved itself and then reinvented itself as British intelligence. It's like the Prussian government dissolved itself and then reinvented itself as something else, and then almost kind of like dangled the Nazi Third Reich up as like a, hey, let's have a major continental war that'll destroy European Western civilization, which has happened. And then on the ruins of World War II, we have the creation of NATO and then the creation of the European Union.
Yes, exactly.
And in the Rumble chat all along says Konrad Adenauer sees his relations with Ford as mayor of Cologne spelling. Mayor. So apparently he's got connections with Ford.
Yes.
The same Ford that was financing the Nazis.
Yes.
Interesting.
Exactly.
All right, so looking at these supporting partners, I saw the Atlantic Council there. Again, the Atlantic Council is one of their members is Dmitry Alperovitch from CrowdStrike.
And all of the former CIA directors.
Yeah. I found something here. One of the other sponsors is something called the U.S.-Ukraine Org. And I just pulled them up just now and look at their staff. Oh, we got a Nadia McConnell. Wonder if that's related to Mitch.
I will look that up.
There's a Robert McConnell. Any other good names there?
How do you spell the second one?
Robert McConnell.
Robert. Okay, Robert, not Robin. Okay, got it.
Any advisors we know about? There's an Edward Chow. I wonder if it's related to Elaine Chow, Mitch McConnell's husband. Mitch McConnell's wife, I mean. Sorry. Maybe I'm sorry.
You never know these days.
Yeah.
It does not appear that Nadia is related to Mitch, but let me check on Robert.
I'll keep going down while you're looking. We got some more sponsors.
Oh, Volkswagen, who was infamous for their Nazi participation.
Yep. No, it does not appear that Robert is related to Mitch as well. So just a coincidence, apparently.
So that's a pretty interesting forum for Mike Pompeo, former director of the CIA, to be attending right in the middle of a war.
Yeah, it is. And, this is all of this is kind of a continuation of everything that happened in the immediate aftermath of World War II. And if you'll indulge me on that, I can share some things. So right after World War II ends, 1946, Truman deploys the Franklin Roosevelt aircraft carrier and parts of the Sixth Fleet to the Turkish Straits. If you want to share my screen, I'll just show some maps here. And for the reasons that Brady kind of explained earlier, there was a reposturing as soon as the war ended. It was like, all right, we're not going to turn our attention to Soviet Russia, and we're gonna start a conflict with them. And the idea was we sent the carrier group, we sent, I think, the Missouri battleship to Istanbul. And the idea was to control the Turkish Straits because we didn't want, we were trying to strong arm Russia. Truman then issues the Truman Doctrine, which I believe was related to the Greek and Turkish civil wars the Greek Civil War that was happening there. 1947. He asked Congress for like $400 million, which back then was a lot of money. Gives most of that to Turkey. And as I understand it, he kind of like almost it's like a drug addict. It's like you start giving money to a country. And by the way, you and I, Brady, have talked about this so many times, how the federal government gives state governments money and then that gets built into the budget. And then all of a sudden the federal government's like, oh, well, if you want to continue receiving that money, you better do X, Y, Z at the state level. That's how you gain leverage over them, is by having it built into their budget. So then in 1952, they extend the invite to Turkey to join NATO. And after the Korean War, because apparently Turkey was sending, I guess, troops to Korea to help fight that. And Turkey becomes, like, in my opinion, one of the most critical members of NATO. And for this reason right here on screen is because they are Russia's access to the world through the Black Sea. Without Turkey, without Istanbul and the Turkish Straits, the only way Russia can really access the entire Western Hemisphere, including Africa, is to go around, is to go either through the Baltic Sea or go around the like Norway. And that's like insane.
And that's why Russia's investing a lot of money in trying the sea lanes by the Arctic sea lanes. That's going on. But if you focus back in on Istanbul, used to be called Constantinople. There's a big historical reference here. That was the basically capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, which lasted 1,000 years longer than the Western, until Venice basically diverted the Fourth Crusade and got it toppled by Muslims. I bring up Venice because Venice basically invented the modern banking system. They were one of the maritime empires. When they were going to get invaded by the rest of Europe, they bribed the Holy Roman Empire at the last minute to stop the invasion. But the Venetian Doges realized that they were vulnerable to a land attack. They had a great maritime power. They were always going at it with Constantinople. They ended up emigrating, and these are the 13 families, or the black nobility, they call them. They would emigrate and marry throughout Europe. First, they went to the Netherlands, who created a great seafaring empire, and eventually they wanted to get to England, which they did with the great, the Glorious Revolution of 1688, where William and Mary became the king. Dutch, basically a Dutch king takes over the throne of England, and England becomes a maritime power and built the empire with the sun never sets, using the exact same tactics, espionage, British East India Company type stuff. That's exactly where this comes from. Same regions, and now we've got Russia fighting to get a foothold on the Black Sea again. So yeah, this is a long history that's repeating itself.
And you bring up a point that Matt has really educated me on, that because I always had a bad feeling about the whole Crusade narrative, and nobody ever talks about the Fourth Crusade. And the Fourth Crusade, as Matt has taught me, was they went straight to Constantinople, they sacked it, they raped it, they pillaged it, and they stole so much stuff that they didn't even have room on the ship to make it to Jerusalem. They just turned around and went home, and that was the end of the Crusade. And then because of that, because of the damage they did to Constantinople, the Ottomans, which who had come down from, let me show you where the Ottomans came from. They came from this area. They're actually Turks, and they traveled around like the 1200s. They were chased by the Mongols all the way down to this area, Turkmenistan. So they're called Turkmen. That's actually like the ethnicity is Turkmen. And so Turkmenistan is where most of them ended up landing. And then one tribe continues across Persia, and in like right here where Bursa is, right on like the front doorstep of the Byzantine Empire, which is a Greek Christian empire, longest lasting empire, I believe, in history, as I understand it, or at least in Western civilization. And the Ottomans are the ones who actually then overthrow Constantinople and take over the Middle East and take over this entire region. And what's interesting about that is that not only are they Turkmen, they're not from this area. They're not Middle East origin. They also, again, as Matt has educated me, prior to that whole situation, around 1300, is you had the caliphate. So you had the Prophet Muhammad. He dies. There's a big power vacuum, a big struggle. He has a few successors. His closest advisors become the leaders of the caliphate. And then when the fourth successor, who was like his little brother / like almost like his son that he raised, like his adoptive son that he raised, comes into power, you have these. This is where the Shia Sunni split happened, where you had people who believed that only people of his bloodline should be the leader of the caliphate. There's a big fight. You have the Amuya, I think is how you say it, caliphate overthrow these friends of Muhammad, take over, and then they're the ones who actually lead the Muslims across North Africa into Spain and then try to take over Europe. And the reason they did that is because they couldn't penetrate Constantinople and take over Europe from the east, because the Byzantines were too powerful. After that happens, years later, they are overthrown by better forces in the caliphate, like more discerning, more, I guess you'd say, altruistic forces, who then go to the Byzantines, who, I mean, go to the Holy Roman Emperor at the time would have been not Constantine, but what's his name? What? Who's the super famous Holy Roman Emperor? Somebody help me out here.
Oh God, goodness! I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on that. I was just talking about him.
We'll come back to him, but there's this moment where they visit him. An emissary is sent to visit the Holy Roman Emperor. He brings him war elephants. He says, "I'm sorry, like we apologize for invading Europe. Those were our, bad actors who took over the caliphate. Let's work together." They invite the Europeans to come to Baghdad. Baghdad was far more advanced and sophisticated at the time than Europe was. They were doing surgery. They were doing they were using all kinds of medicine that did not exist in Europe. They were putting people to sleep, cutting them open, operating on them, sewing them up. And so he said, "Come to our houses of knowledge and study, and then you can spread this knowledge to Europe." All of that basically is thrown away when this whole dynamic with the Ottomans occurs. And it's all because of what you said. Venice goes to Constantinople and sacks it.
Charlemagne.
Thank you. It was Charlemagne. That story, that's such a good story. And that's really what I think in a lot of ways we're seeing happen now with Trump and MBS is the restoration of that relationship where Charlemagne and
let me add to that story.
Yeah.
If I can share the screen real quick. This is the Ottoman Empire in 1914. And I will make the argument that World War I, one of the main reasons it was started, it was to break up the Ottoman Empire. Coincidentally, this whole area, what's listed as Arabia, is where they had just discovered oil.
Correct.
And then the British would carve it up into these artificial territories so they could divide and conquer, and basically British Petroleum and Royal Dutch Shell could basically mine the resources of these countries. This is early version of regime change. It's exactly what we've been doing throughout the 20th century, and it's almost always about oil or gas or natural resources. And that brings us right back to Ukraine. Why is that war happening in the first place? And it's about a natural gas pipeline.
Yep. And going back to Catherine the Great and the Ottomans fought several wars because of Eastern Mediterranean politics. Harun al-Rashid, he's the guy whose name I couldn't remember, who sent the emissary, sent the war elephants to meet with Charlemagne.
It was 840 AD.
Yeah. And the British then come in and put their thumb on the scale to kind of get the Ottomans to really push back against Russia. And then that's where that leads all the way up to World War I. And that's where it culminates, where you have the British then going to these other Arabs and saying, let's overthrow the Ottomans. And at the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire ceases to exist.
Yeah, Ghost, that's where you really started your research when you were, what's the movie?
Lawrence of Arabia.
Thank you. When you did that breakdown there, I knew you were on their track or something. And that really got you started.
Yep. That's what started my whole Middle East dive was that whole relationship and the dynamics there. And yeah, I mean, the British intelligence, by the way, at the heart of all of that. And it's the story, even the Palestinian flag. The Palestinian flag was designed by Mark Sykes, who was a British industrialist. And he's the guy who actually put the pin on the map and drew up the lines that we now call Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. He's the one who drew those lines, the Pico-Sykes Agreement of 1917, 1916. And he's the one who also designed the flag of the Arab Revolt, which is now the Palestinian flag. And
as we sit here today in Istanbul at this very moment, Ukrainians and Russians are meeting for alleged peace talks in Istanbul, which is somewhat symbolic.
I would agree.
And can I add something? I'm going to take this back to Mike Pompeo and illustrate to people who Brady led off talking about you do your initial look into Wikipedia to find out what they want you to know. But if you go all the way down to the Wikipedia references, they're actually crafting a story based on these references, right? And one of the references on Mike Pompeo's page is to a Politico if you actually go to the Politico article, a lot of what's in the article is not anywhere on the page, but it is critically important. We talked about Thayer Air, the aircraft company, right? At the beginning. He had two partners that he partnered with to do that. One guy's name's Ulrich Breckbaugh, and the other guy's name is Brian Bulato.
Yeah, they're both in West Point.
They were both West Point classmates of his. All of them end up going to the Harvard Business School, which we know they recruit CIA people out of the Harvard Business School, both overtly and covertly, to go on into businesses and still have a tether to the CIA. So again, the investor, the Koch brothers, who have come up several times in this conversation today. If you look at these two people, let me just pull them up real quick.
While she's doing that, we should mention that the Koch brothers have always been rabidly anti-Trump.
Yes. One of them, the Ulrich Breckbaugh guy, I think is how you say his name. In addition to going to West Point, he in Harvard, he becomes, he's in the Persian Gulf War, and he goes to work for Bain and Company. Okay. And he goes on to, he was in the 2019 U.S. delegation to Greenland, and he worked with people on the National Security Council. And if you go on down, he was involved in the Ukrainian controversy as it relates to President Trump. Supposedly, he was identified as a 2019 whistleblower of someone who had listened in on the phone call to Trump that was part of the initial coup that was ran on Trump.
So wait a minute. You're telling me that Trump's Secretary of State and head of his CIA, former business partner, was in on impeachment,
Yes.
fake impeachment 1.0?
Yes, that's what I'm telling you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's an awesome connection, Colonel.
Okay, so let me go to the other guy. Brian, let me get back up here. Brian Bulato. He became the chief operating officer at the CIA for Mike Pompeo. And for those of you who don't know, that is the new name for the executive officer, which is the number 3 person at the CIA and the gatekeeper to everything at the CIA. So he then was nominated as Undersecretary of State for Management by President Trump. I'm sure he didn't know what this guy's background was, talking about a vetting process. And guess what he did after he got out of the Army? He went to work for McKinsey and Company.
Of course he did.
Okay. So he is, and then in 2021, he joined Activision Blizzard and became the guy in charge of the Call of Duty video games. Okay, let me go back to this Politico article after we find out who those guys are and that Mike Pompeo is using all of these people in his underground tentacles. It goes on to talk about how the time that he spent at the CIA, and it gets down to some very interesting things about Susan Pompeo. You know, the follow the wives theory? Well, if you start looking into Susan Pompeo, you find out that, and I want to quote here, CNN reported that Susan Pompeo helped manage her husband's calendar while he was the CIA director. She is unofficially working in the CIA as basically his scheduler. And it also says that when the State Department held 2 ceremonies ceremonies earlier this month honoring the more than 2,000 lives lost in the 1998 bombing of the U.S. embassies, Mike Pompeo was absent. But Susan Pompeo was there and spoke at the gathering on behalf of her husband. It also says that another important, lesser-known advisor to Pompeo is Tony Porter, who served as his chief of protocol at the CIA and as an aide to him the entire time that he was a congressman. And for those of you who don't know about protocol, that's what I did when I was deployed. That is another gatekeeper. That person controls all of the setup and ceremonies and engagements, like as ADVON teams when he travels. That's a critical position. She also is from Kansas and served him while he was working in Kansas. So the article goes on and talks about the Michael McKinley, a senior advisor to Mike Pompeo, was a Foreign Service officer who they do double duty as CIA people as well, by the way, who was recently serving as the U.S. ambassador to Brazil. Have we had any problems in Brazil lately? And McKinley went to Oxford. So Mike Pompeo has a huge network of people with tentacles everywhere.
That's fascinating.
And there's a lot more in that article, but that's why I tell people when you're doing research, don't just look at the Wikipedia page. Go down to the references and click on them and read them, because that's where the gems are.
Well, it's critical to do that. Like Wikipedia can be a fine place to start because, especially if you don't really have a good sense of like orienting yourself, because a lot of times the stuff that ends up actually written in the Wikipedia, I mean, that can be changed by the editors. So you always want to go check the source elements that the citations that they provide, and make sure the stuff in the citations is actually the stuff that's being reflected in the Wikipedia itself. You mentioned McKinsey, and we've been talking about Bain. Are you familiar with the origin story of Bain, Brady?
I am. Go ahead and enlighten us. Tell the story.
So there is the Bain is referring to Bill Bain, and he was recruited by a guy named Bruce Henderson in 1967, and basically he was supposed to be to work for a company called Boston Consulting Group. Okay, and the three big firms now in the world are the three big largest management consulting firms are McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group. And so 1967, Bain is hired as a low-level employee by Bruce Henderson over at BCG. He's groomed basically to become his heir apparent. It looks like he's going to become the heir apparent, but then he resigns, goes and starts his own company, Bain and Company. Okay. What's interesting is that 10 years after this guy's hired, Bain's hired not 10 years, maybe 5 or 10 years in the 70s. That's the connection between I mentioned before Netanyahu and Romney. Netanyahu and Romney both were economic analysts at BCG in the 70s when they were roommates, and BCG has been intimately involved in the Middle East for a number of years. They actually them along with McKinsey are involved in like the Saudi Arabia Vision 2030 planning and development. And I don't know what to make of all those connections, but they're there. They also were involved in all the Qatar stuff that was happening in 2022 with the FIFA World Cup, which has now become a new attack vector for the Trump administration, because people like Pam Bondi and a number of other people in the Trump administration were connected to that event, like to the World Cup, and having to massage the public optics of Qatar so that they could host the World Cup despite some of their cultural practices like slavery. So I don't know what to make of like those connections, other than just to say that BCG is the third leg of the tripod, so to speak, when you're talking about McKinsey and Bain and Company. And by the way, the other thing that BCG is known for, relatively recently is in 2022. They're the ones who filed the lawsuit against GameStop. Remember when the whole GameStop thing happened?
Oh yeah.
And I mean, that's still an ongoing thing. And I'm sure you probably know more about it than I do. But the TLDR is that basically GameStop was being shorted, like extremely shorted. And all of a sudden, when all of these like meme posting kind of shitlords on 4chan started buying GameStop because somebody had realized how over leveraged it was in terms of the short shares. That's when these institutions almost got caught in this giant like short trap, right? And they almost lost everything. And that's why Robinhood had to stop trading one day, and there were all these like breakers that were put in place to.
Yeah, they broke a ton of rules. You know, it's interesting about the naked short selling is I actually know the guy who put together the thing called Reg Show, which is basically to make so you couldn't do naked short selling, and he did that on behalf of Patrick Byrne. Because they were doing the same thing to Patrick Byrne's company, Overstock.com. And I know the guy who actually worked with Patrick and got Reg Show put in place, say, trend out of Newport Beach. So, yeah, I've been all over that story for quite some time.
Interesting.
So let me also point out that I ran across the Boston Consulting Group when I was doing the deep dive into United Fruit and then Chiquita Bananas and all of that, because they are tied to Angola and the oil in Angola. And if you guys don't know, that was during the Reagan administration, we basically tried to secure all of the resources in Angola by supporting the corrupt UNITA element of the three organizations that were vying for power once Angola was kind of coming in of itself. And there was a huge CIA operation type destabilization effort to include using the CIA's Miami-based Cuban exiles to infiltrate Angola and take over all of their natural resources, because they border the Congo where the uranium and the gold and the diamonds are. And so they've been buying, and Boston Consulting Group was tied into some of those efforts.
Anybody know where Mike Pompeo went to work after left the Trump administration?
Oh, it was
the Hudson Institute.
Hudson Institute. Okay. Yeah.
And
yeah.
a friendly reminder that the Hudson Institute was founded by futurist Herman Kahn, who is actually a Bond villain, and his colleagues at the Rand Corporation.
Which is CIA.
Which is definitely CIA, yeah.
Yeah. And it's founded, most of the funding now comes to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Of course it does.
All right, I want to wrap this up with a last little thing on the Black Sea Security Forum, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
All right, one more screen share. They had the first of their conferences last year, and here's the big report that came out of it. Called the Black Sea Journal. It's always rainy in Transnistria. In the first edition of the Black Sea Security Council, focusing on the frozen conflict in Transnistria, hope I'm saying that right, its influence on Moldova, Ukraine, and the Black Sea region. The journal is a continuation of the panel discussion that took place during the first Black Sea Security Forum in 2024. Here's the English version of it. And what they're basically talking about, what to do with the black hole of Europe. And this is worth the read. It's pretty lengthy, so we're not going to go into it too deeply. But we open the show talking about what's going on with Russia-Ukraine. Why is Pompeo flying in there right now to a council that's all focused on Transnistria, which I absolutely would love to be united with a land corridor to Russia. So I'm making the speculation that Russia may take Odessa.
Well, I will also say we did a deep dive into that Transnistria area right after because it is a mini Ukraine. It is exactly the same scenario. They have ethnic Russians that live in that area that is under duress, and there are terrorist organizations going into that area, creating chaos in order to destabilize that area. It is a mini Ukraine.
Yeah, and Moldova is basically outlawing the speaking of the Russian language, just like Ukraine did
It's a
legislatively.
mini Ukraine. Yep.
Yep. But you think about all the resources we have poured into the Ukraine, all the investment from Western companies, knowing that they could end up with, basically being the sponsor of a landlocked, backwater, corrupt country. And now you understand why this war is not going to end, or it hasn't.
Couldn't happen to a better bunch of people.
Yeah. And I guess I'll wrap up with kind of this connection. Because you mentioned pipelines, and I think that's a big part of this. We kind of started at the beginning talking about the importance of the Turkish Straits and maritime trade, and how prior to pipelines, all the oil was being traded on ships. Obviously, the pipeline thing has really taken off in the past couple decades. And if you want to share my screen, Colonel, Pepe Escobar has been talking about this for 20 years, and he calls it pipeline. This is an article he wrote in 2009. Back then, he was calling it Pipelinistan, and he attributed our interest in Afghanistan to that, and the idea of wanting to control that region, particularly Iran, because we were worried about, when I say we, I mean the CIA and their interest partners were worried about how these pipelines were going to change the dynamic of power in the emerging energy fields, or fields of energy, connecting China to Iran to Russia. And he certainly cites throughout this write-up, he cites Zbigniew Brzezinski, he cites the 1998 Grand Chessboard book, which I've become familiar with through Matt, and Matt has explained that what Zbigniew says, or Brzezinski says, is the one thing they have to prevent at all costs is a China, Iran, Russian alliance. He's like, that's the one thing that could really, really flip over the chessboard for us. So we have to stop that at all costs. And if you look at this map that he's showing, this is a 2009 map, and let me see if I can just zoom in because it's not letting me open it. But you can see the green lines are the existing pipelines. The red lines are the existing pipelines. This is 2009. The blue and orange pipelines are the proposed pipelines. So you have one that goes into China. You have one that goes into India. That would obviously connect China and India to Russia and Iran. You have another one that's going out of Iran into Europe, and that was one that they were really worried about. And then this other map. This is also from 2009. This shows like the European pipelines. All of these are Russian controlled. These are all the Russian controlled pipelines. And so down here, like Romania, if you can orient yourself to Odessa, you see there's a pipeline that runs right through Transnistria, goes down the western coast of the Black Sea. You can kind of see how Russia, because Russia is very rich in oil and gas. It's a big, like everyone's heard of the Nord Stream pipeline. Here's Nord Stream pipeline right up here in the Baltic. All of this stuff has to do with the dynamic of power and how this unipolar hegemony, what we would call the CIA and their partners, are worried about a multipolar world where they have real competition because others have control over energy resources and not just them.
And I will close with this. It's a reminder that from the beginning, the CIA has never worked on behalf of the American people or the American government. They work on behalf of an oligarchy system that decides where we're going to go to destabilize. And a lot of it is involving oil and natural resources, which oil is one of them. And if you look at concerted destabilization, like what they're doing in India, and you just outline China boogeyman, let's destabilize India, surrounding with Pakistan, what was East Pakistan, Bangladesh. Now they just overthrew the Bangladeshi because that prime minister did not want the NATO base in the northern area of Bangladesh. So that has to go. The same thing with surrounding Russia. And it's being done to destabilize them because of the control that Ghost just outlined. And once you understand that the CIA, and it's not just the front seeing CIA, it's bad enough. The tentacles of their infiltration into legitimate businesses. The whole purpose of AIG and its insurance worldwide was to seed intelligence assets to gather information on behalf. And if you don't think that as an insurance company that has the all-seeing eye of all of the resources that the CIA brings to it, so they know what to insure and what not to insure, doesn't give you ultimate control, you're crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And that certainly ties to the whole Promise software, if you're familiar with that scandal.
Exactly.
And how Mossad stole the Promise software from the DOJ back in the 80s. And basically, Promise stands for like prosecutorial management software. And then went and sold it to all of the it's like an AI to help you manage your criminal cases. Sold it to all the intelligence agencies, sold it to all of the governments around the world. But they first installed a backdoor that allowed them to steal everything that these governments were putting into this software. Mossad was then getting a copy of. And think about the blackmail potential that you would have if you had access to all of the criminal prosecutions happening around the world at the same time.
And the CIA had their version with their backdoor of the Promise software as well. And that goes right along with our Exposing Crypto AG, which had a backdoor to all of the diplomatic cables around the world. They have controlled this information for a very long time. And that's why, taking it back home to Brady, is the lack of criminal prosecution of these people and covering these law firms where you understand they're on both sides. The people that are connected to this apparatus are on both sides of just about every lawsuit.
Best example of that, by the way, is the Fox News Dominion lawsuit. Do you remember when Fox News said they settled the lawsuit for like $800 million, and basically that communicated to everybody, you better not talk about Dominion or you're going to get sued and you're going to lose the court case because they lost the court case. If Fox News can't beat Dominion, how are you going to stand a chance against Dominion?
Correct.
Yep. And they never even got to Discovery. Although Fox News did just get a win against one of the other voting machines just like a week or two ago. Was it Smartmatic or one of the other ones? Anyway, what a tangled weave these people have wove.
Absolutely. So I think Ghost had some visitors. But anyway, that's going to wrap us up today. Thank you all for being here and following us down the rabbit hole of some very interesting information that you're not going to hear on mainstream television. Brady?
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for coming. I mean, it's just a great example of how, just you find a blurb, someone sends you just one small tweet, 15-second video, you do some research with a couple of other really great minds, and you really just see the whole pattern.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. This is fun. I'm happy to do this whenever because, there's a lot of good information that came out of this discussion.
Yeah, we'll be doing more of these due to popular request.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for joining us.